world's most valuable resource isn't oil or gold, it's people. But the way that we're extracting this resource is like using a pickaxe to mine gold, right? Mining human potential is no different. If we want to maximize this extraction of human potential, we need to change the methods that we've been using for centuries. These methods might look familiar to you, right? This is not just a place where you learn information. This is a place where we're developing people, where we're developing humans. You spend most of your time thinking about this place, being in this place physically, than you do in any other aspect of your life. The world has completely changed, but this place hasn't changed much, right? This still looks relatively familiar, and we're still learning very similar things that people have been learning a long, long time ago. When we think about the minimum standard for people to enter the real world, it's actually pretty laid out for us, like the minimum bar for people. And I would argue that's graduating from high school. So what's the minimum bar to graduate from high school? It looks something like this, right? English, math, science, we're all very familiar with this. And when you look across the world, it is very similar, right? So like in California, same type of thing, English, math, science. The reality is we think this is a minimum bar, but it's not the minimum bar. It is actually the minimum and the highest bar. Because the reality is when we're in high school, we're not just focusing on passing the minimum, we're focused on getting 100%. And so people today are trying to do as best they can in only these areas. What the result of this is tunnel vision. People are growing up in tunnel vision. We spend so long looking at our textbooks that we forget what's happening in the real world. That's a huge problem. So when I was in high school, while I was studying for my math test and my chem test or whatever, Facebook was starting up. Google was growing. Apple was releasing their first iPod. And I had no idea that there were people sitting behind a computer writing code that would eventually impact billions and change the way we live. I had no idea that I could use something called programming to create an application to not only impact billions of people, but also potentially create billions of dollars in value. Today, the equivalent for code is much, much more and much more impactful. But people have no idea what these things are. So let's go through a couple of these things that are our tools to solve the world's most important problems and create a ton of value, right? Things like artificial intelligence. We've seen the advance of machine learning and AI over the past couple of years, and this is just the beginning. A couple really important applications that people are working on right now is things like being able to use machine learning to detect skin cancer better than dermatologists, or being able to develop autonomous vehicle software that's helping us build driverless cars. The reason why this is so important is because most car accidents happen because of people. But if you can take the people out of it, we're saving a ton of lives. So it's not just like a cool, nice, slick car. This is life-saving stuff we're building with AI. Right? Or let's look at mixed reality, being able to superimpose objects on top of the real world. We can use this in a ton of really important areas, not just Pokemon Go or Snapchat. In surgical rooms, surgeons are using mixed reality and augmented reality to be able to actually see data from the patient right in front of them without having to look up. And then also when they're looking at the patient, being able to know where the incision should be, how deep they should cut, and what they should do. So it's really guiding them to make sure that they're not making mistakes, which is a big problem. Or if we look at genetic engineering, a few years ago, a new tool was released and discovered called CRISPR. And it's a way where we can more effectively edit our genes. This is insane when you think about it, editing the composition that we're based in all living things. One example that is currently being used right now at MIT is being able to leverage CRISPR to address the problem of malaria. And we're doing this really, really well. Blockchain is another one of these tools that is extremely impactful. But when we think about blockchain, what do we think about? Bitcoin, Ethereum, these cryptocurrencies. But the reality is it's much, much more than that. When you have a technology that enables us to make data immutable, distributed, and decentralized, you can do a lot with that. I would argue one of the most important problems in the world is land ownership, especially for the bottom billion. In Kenya, this is a big, big problem. You have people that are not keeping track of their land. It might be on a piece of paper. It might just be word of mouth. And then you have that combated with corruption, which is using, money to influence who owns what. And obviously the people that don't have money can't do anything about it. But if we leverage blockchain, we can make sure that the people that own their land actually own their land. You can make sure you know who owns their land because everything's transparent, right? If it's immutable, it can't be changed. So we should be using new technologies to solve these types of problems. What about quantum computing? I'm sure a lot of you, especially in Waterloo, have heard about quantum computing, leveraging quantum mechanics to do things that our supercomputers can't even do. Quantum computing enables us to solve the world's hardest problems. And when you think about an extremely hard problem, it's almost playing God. Simulating molecules for drug discovery is being done right now at a very early stage. But when you think about over the next few years, 10, 20 years, we'll be able to simulate new drugs by looking at molecules to be able to address some of our biggest diseases. Nanotechnology, being able to manipulate things at a nano scale to solve some really important problems. A very, very underestimated industry right now and still extremely early. And one of the uses for this is in energy. So for solar panels, we're able to actually build nanomaterials to absorb 85% of visible light, which is 11 times better than current methods. Global warming is one of the world's most important problems and probably will be addressed by advancements in nanotechnology. Cellular agriculture, being able to actually grow meat in a lab, right, without an animal or anything. The implications of this are way bigger than we might think, not just for animal activists and helping animals, but it's much, much more than that. When you look at the impact of meat and the impact that it has on the environment, it's immense, right? And when you look at a company called Beyond Meat, and there's other companies like Impossible Foods that are working on this, that are creating new types of meat, synthetic meats, it helps actually save a ton of land, a ton of water, and a ton of energy. And this is fundamental to humanity and civilization. And 100 years from now, we're going to look back and think how crazy it was that people used to eat meat, right? Because we could just grow it in a lab, and it's healthier, it's cheaper, and it's better for the world. This is a no-brainer, but again, not many people are working on it. And the last one I'll talk about is brain-computer interfaces, being able to connect our minds with external applications. To conceptualize this is so difficult. This is one of those things where, if people look back 200 years ago and tried to imagine where we would be today, it'd be so hard to really understand that. It's the same for us in brain-computer interfaces, BCIs. But one example is what Facebook is working on, being able to use your mind to just type on a keyboard. Relatively simple, still mind-blowing, but when you think about what this evolves into, it's pretty insane, right? Being able to communicate with technology like you communicate with your arm. And you take this a step further, what if you could communicate with other brains, brain-to-brain communication? What does society look like then? Can we tackle some important problems that revolve around human nature like empathy, which I would argue is fundamental to civilization? And so ultimately we have this gap between what is happening in the real world and how we're developing people in our institutions. The minimum bar needs to change because the world has completely changed. A few years ago, my brother and I started this organization, TKS, the Knowledge Society. And what we wanted to do is bridge that gap. We wanted to develop people to solve the world's most important problems using these new tools, using emerging technologies. And so what we did is we started an 8-month program, geared it for people ages 13 to 17, high school, because that's where the learning happens. That's where you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life. That's where you got to make the most important decisions of what you want to study in university, which arguably dictates a lot of your trajectory. And that's where I think a lot of our problems are during that stage in life. And so we've run programs in San Francisco, Calgary, Toronto, and Waterloo. And the students in our program are doing incredible things. And the model is based off 3 fundamental principles: developing knowledge, mindset, and skill set. These are the 3 pieces that we need to focus on with human development. With knowledge, it's a lot of the things that I talked about today. AI, genetic engineering, quantum computing. It's the knowledge of these new tools. But once you have that knowledge, you have to do something with it, right? Just having knowledge alone is not enough. And so you need the mindset to be able to do something with it. You need things like confidence. You need to think 10x instead of 10%. You don't want to move things incrementally. You want to move things in order of magnitudes. You need tenacity, grit, all of these things, and they can be trained. And we know these are the things that help people affect change because the people that have affected change have told us these things. And they're not just buzzwords. So now once you have the knowledge and the mindset, you have to have the ability to execute. You have to have the ability to do it, the skills. And so what we do is we focus on real-world skills. These skills that most people end up learning on the job if they're lucky. But these are things that we should be focusing on as fundamental and training. Things like networking, communicating, being resourceful, just learning how to figure stuff out. Right? If you're going to solve the world's hardest problems, guess what? They don't have answers yet. And so you need to build the skill of learning how to figure out problems that don't have solutions yet, rather than just flipping to the back of your textbook and seeing an answer, right? The result of these things are real. When you take someone and start intentionally developing them to solve important problems, you get people that look like this. This is Sabrish, 14 years old. He gave a keynote at the world's largest augmented reality conference in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. This is Zaina, also 14 years old, gave a talk on the main stage at C2 on artificial intelligence in front of thousands of people. This is Ananya, who's 16 years old, gave a talk at Ethereum's dev conference on blockchain and emerging technologies, right? You have these incredible people doing amazing things. Ria, also 14 years old, started a company called SmartCane, which is helping the visually impaired with a new type of technology that uses haptic feedback and computer vision, right? Incorporating these new tools to solve old problems. Or you have Shagun, 15 years old, who's actually flown down to Las Vegas by Microsoft to present to how Microsoft can be using AI and machine learning to develop new products to solve important problems. And I love looking at this picture because I saw her work so hard, going from a girl who was just, extremely nervous, who lacked confidence in front of other people, to being someone who got a standing ovation from Microsoft in Vegas. This is incredible. Or people like Shalev, who's on the Discovery Channel demoing his own project on real-time image classification. So you can hold up like a phone or your hand and it'll tell you this is a phone, this is a hand. The same technology is fundamental to autonomous vehicles so that cars and vehicles can identify, this is a person, this is a tree, right? And you can understand how that might be important when making decisions. Or this is a stop sign, or this is another car, right? These technologies can be used to solve important problems. And so when we think about human development, I really believe that we underestimate people because we use the experience of our past. And we think, okay, what was I capable of when I was 14, 15, 16 years old? And what am I capable of now? But the problem is we all went through the same systems in a different world. And so we completely underestimate what people are capable of because this is a new world. And when we put a new system on top of this new world, we get completely different results. And so if we want to solve the world's most important problems, we need to develop new systems to maximize human potential so that these people can use the tools that we have to solve the world's most important problems. Thank you.